things that is really top of mind for knife customers but also knife makers is handle ergonomics. If you notice that if you ever go to a blade show or if you even go to a normal knife store, but specifically at Blade Show, whenever people go up to a particular stand, whether it's a big brand or really custom knife maker, either they're starting out or they're not that well known a maker, the first thing people tend to do, go up to the stand, talk to the maker or talk to the representative for the big brand and just start to handle the knife. When a person handles it, is that the customer is trying to make a decision around the purchase of the knife based off of handle ergonomics. And this is top of mind for knife makers as well, not only from the perspective of philosophy of use, how often are they going to use it, and what kind of tasks. They're also thinking of it from the perspective that a lot of knife customers make their purchasing decisions based off of how it feels in the hand. So regardless of the steel type or even how sharp it is or how it could perform, it really comes down to how does it feel in my hand. One of the things that stood out to me about the Schafer Big Chopper Bowie, there is a sense of handle ergonomics, but it's really very subtle. Let's take a look first at the definition of ergonomics and really what it is. The common perception is that we start to take a look at a certain object, how it tends to mold to the human anatomy to optimize function while you're in that seat. So sitting in an uncomfortable chair for long periods of time, one of the important considerations is the ergonomics in terms of how it's going to adapt to the human anatomy and how it will then optimize its performance. And that's very much in place here with the Schafer Big Chopper Bowie, but it is very subtle. There is another definition when it comes to ergonomics, and ergonomics is also defined as how the human being actually adapts itself efficiently for the safe implementation of force generation when moving particularly heavy objects. This is something that you tend to see with workers who are going to be more in the labor force. They're going to be lifting heavier objects, especially if they work in a warehouse. So instead of muscling a particular object, like if you see here in this video where I am using my entire body to lift a 315-pound barbell for a Zercher lift, that is an example of good kinesthetic awareness and also force generation and a lot of athletic training. But it's not an example of good ergonomics. Good ergonomics, as it relates to moving an object, has a lot to do with taking the majority of your mass and using it as a lever to move very heavy objects. If we're taking a look at very heavy steel drums or we're lifting a heavy object, a lot of what's being taught in the labor force has a lot to do with this type of ergonomics. How are we using our bodies efficiently to reduce risk of injury so that when we move an item, we are not injuring ourselves? So there's two definitions that's out there. One of them is that the object molds itself to us, but the other definition is how we mold our own movement patterns to the object. What I want to cover today, how these two processes actually help us define the most important part, in my opinion, of making a purchasing decision around a knife: handle ergonomics. For this episode specifically, since we're going to be talking about the Schafer Big Chopper Bowie, is that there are going to be two categories when it comes to handle ergonomics. So you're going to have handle ergonomics for the type of double duty Bowie knives like what you see with the Schafer Big Chopper Bowie, but now you also have those dedicated fighters. A very good example of the first time I was exposed to really good handle ergonomics specific to fighters is the Bagwell dog bone custom Bowie. It's made for me by Bill Bagwell way back in the early 2000s. He was very specific about it, and let me share with you some of the thoughts that he gave me when it came to the design of this specific dog bone handle. One of the things that he talked about is exactly where he put these particular rivets. The idea that he had was that when I was doing back cuts or snap cuts, is that these rivets over here were going to be right on top of my index, and then on the opposite side, my thumb would be right underneath it. So I would know where I was. My thumb moved up and down, and as my own index finger would get feedback from the bump here on the rivet, so that I would know specifically where I was, even if my fingers would let go for a snap cut. So I knew exactly where I would be whenever I was moving in a back cut flow with a Bagwell knife. The other thing I want us to consider is that how the guard is designed. Notice how this part of the devil's horn guard is actually in line with the Spanish notch. That's an important part. If we happen to get into a bind, we slide up or down to catch the blade, then leverage it. The thing I want us to pay attention here is that the devil's horn is that much longer and this part is that much shorter, so that the guard itself actually assists in the proper balance of this specific Bagwell custom, so that when I am moving with it with my backcut flow or my inquartada techniques, it balances itself in such a way so that it really flows. The thing that I want us to think about in addition to all of this is that aside from the guard, aside from the rivets that are here, you also have this nice chunk of dog bone so that it works as a counterbalance. So for me, when I'm working with it, although the center of this blade is going to be closer here, the fulcrum is going to be right around here, and this nice weight over here counterbalances it, so that if I'm doing any snap cutting action as this goes forward, not only does this counterbalance back, but it also pushes into this portion of my hand so that my tricep line fires, because there are mechanoreceptors in this part of my hand, so that when it feels that pressure, that tricep line fires. So now it's an even more forceful snap cut or thrust. So as you can see, this kind of thinking is what goes into the design of a custom fighter, especially at this peak level of fighting Bowie knives at the custom level, and nothing really beats a Bagwell fighter. Kissing cousin to this type of fighting Bowie knife, and very similarly ergonomically designed with the right kind of indexing, is none other than Bobby Raines Rainemaker, which I have featured on my channel several times. But note also that this is an S guard. But the thing I want you to consider is that the S guard here is similarly proportioned, just like the Bill Bagwell custom. Notice that the front portion of the guard is very similar in this manner, in that this is much longer than the one in the back, similar to this one. Longer, shorter. This helps with the balancing of it, so that if I'm snap cutting, thrusting, it wants to fall forward, but then it falls forward enough with the right indexing so that I can actually move out of the way. Bobby did something so special for this, and this is why I love his Rainmaker design so much, in that he had a slightly different idea and a little more innovation with regards to how the handle ergonomics were as far as my hand was concerned. If you take a look at it, Bill's rivets are a little higher, so it's right in line with my index finger and thumb. But what Bobby did is that he moved those rivets a little lower down. So if we look at that comparison again, guard on guard, you see how the rivets up here are higher, but this one is lower, because his thought process was he'd seen enough of my videos that he knew I like to change grips ever so slightly so that I could get more reach. And he knew that my indexing for my specific estacada Bowie style is that I like to be up here and I like to back cut, but every now and then I'll index over here, get a little more reach, but I still need to know where I am. So he knew that I like to switch. Sometimes I like to be above the rivet, and then I like to be below the rivets. This is a very wonderful and, in my opinion, ingenious innovation by my good friend Bobby Raines. But notice the thought process that goes into the ergonomics, not only in terms of how it informs me as the Bowie knife fighter, but also in terms of the comfort in design, so that it optimizes my own force generation and my own efficiency in the back cut flow. One of the important things that's really compelling to me about Schafer's work is that he designed his Schafer Big Chopper Bowie not as a fighting knife. He designed it as a double duty knife, very reminiscent of the type of Bowie knives that are used in competition cutting. As a result of this, there is minimal ergonomics, meaning you don't get that much indexing off of it, because it's not designed to do any sort of back cut flowing, any sort of snap cutting from a traditional Keating Bagwell fighting paradigm. The idea is that you go to a cutting competition, you cut your rope, do your 2x4 chop, you see an aquarium, you go for those tennis balls, and then you try to win it as efficiently as possible. And this is the kicker, with as few hot spots in your hand as possible. This is a very important feature, because a fighting Bowie is designed By multi-planar movement, the ability to go from one plane of movement to another, whether it's frontal, sagittal, or transverse, and how it moves into circular movements, those are not demands of a double-duty competition Bowie knife. It tends to pick just one plane at a time in a repetitive fashion. So a fighting Bowie tends to be back cut, change planes, reverso, change planes, snap cut, change planes, inquartata, same plane, back cut, different plane. So you're never really going to do anything repetitive. And from a health standpoint, as far as your joints are concerned, this is why I love Bowie back cut flows so much, because it exposes my body to multi-planar movement that is away from the type of repetitive stress movements that we are exposed to on a daily basis. This is very different with the chopper buoy because it anticipates repetitive stress movement because it is a dedicated chopper. You're going to be chopping for a very long time or slicing for a very long time with very specific force generation in that specific plane. So the first consideration when it comes to a chopping buoy is how comfortable it's going to be in repetitive stress movement. As a result of that, you don't need all of those rivets telling you, hey, it's time to back cut this way. Oh, let's change angles and now you're in this position when you're thrusting. It doesn't have that. In fact, all of this is very smoothed out. But this is what I really love about the Schafer buoy, because he did add indexing that is so subtle so that I can still do these buoy back cut flows, but it doesn't get in the way of the type of repetitive movements that is required in chopping competition buoys. And it is this very ingenious, subtle sub-hilt that tells me the exact thing that these rivets do when you find them on the Bobby Raines Rainemaker. Instead of having these rivets that really stand out to actually tell me, hey, it's time for you to move into a different plane, what Schafer did, gave this very small one, so at the very least, I know where I am at each time, whether I'm in snap cutting or back cutting, or, I love this part, with this kind of super chopping, so that I am in this kind of more leveraged position because I gave myself this much more leverage, whether I'm chopping into rope or 2x4s. You don't necessarily see this level of intentionality and thought when you're looking at choppers. A very good example of what I consider an overly ergonomic design, but I think it was very well intentioned, is the Swamp Rat Rottweiler. I got this in the early 2000s, back in the day when I was really into choppers and really trying to understand the thought process around it. So notice that here you see a lot of ergonomics. You see this indexing here, so this very high sub hilt, but then if I lower it, it acts as a type of guard. So you have a secondary sub hilt over here. Now you have this beautiful ergonomics on this side, and then it tends to curve down so that I could do this for leveraging for chopping as well. And this is not sharpened, so you can go ahead and baton into the blade safely without getting your piece of wood stuck on top of the false edge. But the thing about this specific one is that when I move with it, put my hand around it, really nice and secure, feels really good in the hand. However, if I should decide to get into these types of back cut flows, snap cutting, going to Bagwell and Keating, some of these ergonomic designs, although very well intentioned and it's not really designed for it, start to dig into my fingers when I'm doing my Bagwell Keating flow. Not a big thing, stiff upper lip the whole thing, but it's not optimized for that kind of work. The thing that I really love about what Jeff Schafer has done is that he has accomplished to do both fighting buoy and competition buoy with even less ergonomic feedback, and in fact he did it with just one stroke. This very subtle bump in the handle, which acts from a neuromuscular standpoint as a type of sub-hilt so that I know where I am on the handle at all times. Really ingenious on your part, Jeff, and I really appreciate what you've done here. So what I'm going to do is move with the Schafer buoy along with the Rainmaker fighting buoy so that I can give you my feedback in terms of what I'm experiencing when I'm doing a buoy back cut flow a la Keating Bagwell versus what I feel when I'm getting this very nice direct feedback when I'm receiving it from a dedicated fighter. I really hope you enjoyed this video, and thank you for letting me share. I'm really excited to do this episode because this is a very direct comparison of two amazing Bowie types. The first one is the Schafer Big Chopper Bowie, a dedicated competition Bowie, and then in a guest starring role we have the Bobby Raines Rainemaker, which is a dedicated fighter which is along the lineage of the Keating Bagwell line. They can't be more different, and if you just take a look at the profiles you can tell. First thing I want you to notice is with the Rainmaker, notice when I back cut, it goes into this relatively 35-degree angle. Also notice that after I back cut, it's a very easy flip of the wrist, so that after I do that, it goes straight into this thrust. Because of the slimmer profile, the mass in the guard, the rivets in the handle, all of these dictate this type of very easy back cut into a thrust with the flip of the wrist. The Schafer Bowie is very different. Notice how after I back cut, it is parallel to the target. A big part of that is because there is no guard on the handle. It's actually easier to redondo into that thrust. It could also snap cut after that redondo. Also, that momentum allows me to go much easier into a Bagwell back cut into a reverso. Pay attention to how I index my left hand on my right forearm. That's because the Big Bowie chopper behaves a lot like a barong, a Filipino barong, where that momentum drives the knife towards my body. So I'm going to need that left hand to assist to prevent it so that that momentum then reverses. This is very unique to the Schafer Big Chopper Bowie, very different from the Rainmaker, because with the Rainmaker, it doesn't have that tendency to go towards me. So I can go ahead and use one hand to execute the Bagwell Keating paradigm without necessarily putting my left hand on it. This is something that is really brought up in a lot of FMA circles. Why do we put our left hand on the right forearm? It's because we need to use some sort of anti-rotational capabilities to reverse the extended lever that is a stick. But this barong chopper Bowie likes to behave a lot like a barong, so it creates that same kind of momentum. And so in order to reverse it, I need some sort of anti-rotational mechanism, and that is the left hand. So one thing I want you to see is as much as I want to use the Bagwell Keating methodology here, it tends to resist it because of the increased mass of the blade. So notice how I like to use my left hand for the power assist here. So I'm going to go into my flow. I'm going to improve upon that flow by adding some of those slashes, but I'm exchanging it on that half beat with my left hand. It makes it very powerful and very quick, but also a great pleasure for me because now I can combine both the Bagwell Keating methodology and some of the biomechanics and paradigms of Filipino martial arts. I can use the power assist to keep my shoulders square. This is critical, especially with the Big Chopper Bowie, because the momentum that is generated is such because of the mass of the blade that if I allow it to move without that power assist, I'm going to have a right shoulder lead, which is a very vulnerable position for me. I need to use my left hand so that I can use the power assist primarily not only to get that blade in front of me, but also to be in a very secure anatomical position to keep my shoulders square. Notice that I barely touch my right forearm with my left hand when I'm using the Rainmaker Bowie because that same momentum is not being generated because of the slimmer profile and because of the mass of that guard kind of holding everything together. So notice how I try to move and try to assist the power with my left hand, but it's just not necessary. It is very different when you're using the type of dimensions that you find with the Schafer Big Chopper Bowie. So I'm here with the Rainmaker, trying to use the same paradigm. It's not necessarily needed because of the lightness of the blade. It really falls more into a European fencing model. Very different with the Schafer. Once again, generate that momentum. It wants to behave like a barong. It wants to come into the body, and I need to check it so that my left hand is there. One thing I want you to also notice with the Rainmaker is that how fast it moves when it goes into that Bagwell Keating methodology, how only one hand is necessary to do this kind of movement. I try to do the same thing with the Schafer Chopper Bowie, just doesn't happen. Look at the face-to-face. You see that angle
You see how it just wants to wrap around. Very different with the Rainmaker. It actually faces forward the whole time. So I can use the Bagwell Keating methodology. Very different from the Schafer. It needs that left hand power assist. So imagine having to face this and having to use this. Notice how it likes to flow better with that left-handed power assist. We go back and you can see now something else that I discovered, in that because of the size and the mass of this blade, I can actually use that mass of the blade to kind of check the forearm of my opponent. So I can go into a check and then reverso from this side. So imagine that I'm using my left hand to kind of control the right hand of my opponent. So think of it this way, in that the Schafer Big Chopper Bowie can also do close quarters work, which is something that the traditional fighting Bowie like the Rainmaker isn't necessarily designed for. In Filipino martial arts, we call this the largo mano range. That is what it is designed for. The Schafer Bowie, see how wide that is from a high visibility standpoint? This is very distracting for anybody. This is very intimidating, but that wideness is also what allows it so that you can use that flat of the blade to kind of check on top of the forearm and also do some low body attacks. Really powerful part of the Schafer Big Chopper Bowie, so that you can use that part of the FMA paradigm. In that it is the first Bowie knife that I've had to work with where it allows me and even encourages me to use the particular ranges of Filipino martial arts that is generally not used in the Bagwell Keating method, and that is the long range, medium range, and even some of those short ranges. I can even use the primary edge a little bit more because it behaves like a Filipino barong. So this is really interesting for my practice because it allows me to explore kind of the hybridization of the Bagwell Keating long form European methodology versus this kind of close quarters FMA methodology, encouraging close quarters movements but also using the power assist as part of that overall biomechanics. As you can see here, when I flow with it, it is this almost very clean and very seamless hybridizing of the Bagwell Keating European based methodology and the FMA based close quarters Asiatic methodologies. My shoulders stay square, but I'm using this kind of back cut and also the type of mechanics that you see in the Bagwell Keating methodology. It's a real pleasure for me because I get to explore both with one tool, and that tool just happens to be the Schafer Big Chopper Bowie. Thank you very much for letting me share. I really hope that you enjoyed this video. Stick around, stay tuned, more videos to come.